Well, I'm really glad y'all are here. My name's Corey Fry. I'm the exhibitions manager at the Delaplane Art Center. Who's ready to zoom into California?
I'm here.
She's here. Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
Well, I'm going to read a bio really quick. I'm going to read Heidi's bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to her. She has some slides, so she's going to share her screen and show us some slides of her work if you haven't been in the gallery to see her work yet. And we're also going to try to figure out questions. If anyone has any questions, I'll come back up and relay questions to her. But we're gonna work this out, and it's going to be great. So Heidi Brueckner lives in and works in Oakland, California, and is a professor of art at West Valley College in Sarasota, California, where she has taught painting, drawing, and design for over 23 years. She's received a BA in Fine Art and a BA in Art History from the University of California, Santa Cruz in 1991, and received an MFA in Painting from University of Kansas in 1997. And her work has been shown in museums, galleries, colleges, and in publications nationally and internationally. Heidi, thanks so much for taking time to be with us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much to Corey and the Delaplane for hosting my show. And it's a pleasure to be here today with you to share a little bit about my work. And so I'll start off by saying in general, I believe that we're interested in observing others as a way of understanding ourselves and the human species. And my work is really inspired by this desire to understand, and it invites the viewer into that observation. I generally work with both archetypes and portraiture, and the archetypes are more things that they're characters that play humorous roles in allegories about morality, human norms, that kind of thing, and they tend to nod to the sort of darker aspects of humankind, I'd say. And so some of those are kind of figures that are more imagined. I've also worked with what I consider somewhat a crossover kind of genre, where it's somewhat of an archetypal character, but based on observational form. And so I thought I'd show you a few self-portraits today, which kind of straddle that line. So this is an older piece of mine. It's called The Four Little Pigs, and it is a self-portrait. And it's basically about the guilt of overeating. It takes place in a bathroom there. You can see me weighing myself, surrounded by these creatures that are sort of trying to tempt me with all this kinds of various foods. And again, I think it's a bit of a comment on societal expectations of what overeating is, if self-indulgence is, and if it's good or bad, and body image, of course. And you'll notice that I use a lot of bright color and a lot of patterns. That's really about kind of heightening the mood in the piece and the energy in the piece. So to add to the psychology, basically. This is another self-portrait done before the pandemic, and it's called Self-Portrait with Bug and Respirator, and it's basically about the process of being an artist and creating work, and how it can be very frustrating in terms of equipment, which is they're symbolized really by the respirator, and then in terms of creative ideas. And so I thought that sort of a bug crawling around in my brain, where it sort of triggered it in a self-doubt way, or in an anxious kind of way, the pressure of being creative. So those two elements were very important in terms of the allegory of the piece there. Another self-portrait This is called Domestic Violence, and it is part of a series of self-portraits posing with various kitchen tools, and ideas around gender roles, traditional gender roles. It humorously sort of suggests that how one can get out of being stuck in the kitchen. And then also, again, the pattern element. One of the things I like to do with my work is use some existing decorative papers. So this was initially a paper that, an art paper that is a marbleized design. And I've been very interested in thinking about how to incorporate flat pattern into more three-dimensional forms. And so you can see that this was partially about how to let the pattern show through and then become part of the form, in terms of how it plays a role with value. This is a more recent self-portrait, very quickly done. I did this on a residency that I had recently in North Carolina, and it's called North Carolina Medusa with the Third Eye Patch. It was mentioned that my degree in art history, and so I do have a pretty broad knowledge of historical painting, but this was directly related to Caravaggio's Medusa, again with the humorous element, and it's basically about the confusion of being in a new place and then sort of having to produce on demand. The different elements that you see in there are imagery from the forests of North Carolina. I was in quite a secluded cabin where I would take walks. And the third eye patch there refers to the idea of the third eye being sort of a way to gain insight into being human, into relating to the world and the universe. But I sort of felt like it was still a mystery to me what I was supposed to be gaining from the experience and trying to figure that out. What you'll see in the gallery are some more recent works that focus mostly now, I would say, really are less of a crossover between archetypal type imagery and portraits. And these are more individualistic narratives that are both basically focused on portraits. What do you see about the person because of through their self-presentation, through their facial expressions, through their gestures, etc. And I do tend to focus on people that I feel are under-revered or underappreciated and really honor the person. This series came about when the pandemic hit and we had to go into lockdown. And so I was really thinking about people in my life and people that I missed, and studying their faces and expression. I really felt a strong need to do that. And so this is a portrait about my mother. And my mother, I was not able to see for a lot of that. She lives in an assisted living home. And so everybody was very careful, of course. But this was a way I felt that I could spend time with her, even though I knew that it would be extremely limited. And at this point, she's very old. She's about 90. She is 96. And suffers from dementia. And so I felt like just this experience of painting her was a really good bonding experience because of missing her, being with her, and then of course the pandemic making it questionable how much time I did have with her. And luckily we've been through it, and she's still around, and we still have time together. This is a portrait. These are quite large pieces, as you'll see in the gallery. This is about 5.5 feet tall, and it's entitled Tween. And this is a portrait of my daughter. And again, this is at the time earlier in the pandemic, around 2020. And again, I was trying to paint people around me, my family members. In this case, it was a situation of intense togetherness. And so that was kind of an interesting alternative viewpoint of coming to the portrait. She's a young art student here. She goes to an art school out here in Oakland, and she's in high school now. But I really was trying to kind of capture the attitudes and insecurities of the age here with her. I mentioned working with existing patterns on paper. The cabinet there that's behind her is actually a reminiscent of an Indian cabinet that we have, an East Indian cabinet that we have in our house. But the main pattern was created by putting a piece of paper behind it and painting on top of it. So again, kind of integrating it with the paint. This is a close friend of mine. And again, during this period where we were not able to really see each other, even outside. And so this was a way of seeing my friend, meeting outside occasionally. And this is him in his, I like to call it his throne. It's his, it's like a tree chair in his backyard. And at this point, I also started to get interested in, I've always used a lot of mixed media, but I started to get interested in using alternative substrates for my work, namely because during that time, we weren't allowed to reuse paper bags for grocery bags. And so I had a lot of paper bags piling up. And then also a lot of mail ordering was happening at the time. So I got a lot of Amazon bubble mailers everywhere. And I thought, what can I do with this? So I started to integrate them into my portraits. So this is all done on paper bags, paper grocery bags. And it achieves, you can see in the slide, of course you can see in real life, that it gets this very crinkly texture that I thought was really fun and interesting. And also the tree is made out of recycled aluminum foil. And then I started not only painting people around me and my close friends and family, I started looking into working with some past images that photographic images that I'd taken in my prior life during travel periods. And so this was a portrait of two children whom I got friendly with when I went to Kenya. I was there on a Habitat for Humanity trip, and in the back there you can see sort of a crackly structure, and that was their original mud house that we were replacing with a brick and mortar house. And so they were just lovely kids, and I thought I would create something about the past, also as a way of reconnecting to my traveling experiences and in my past interactions with people in other countries. You can see I have a pretty assertive aesthetic. I really love, again, the bright color and the pattern. This was another one of a woman that I met. It was not as close a relationship as the kids, but this is a woman that I met in Cuba, and I call it Cigar and Nails in Havana. And this is where I start to, I'm not only using some paper bags, but using some Amazon bubble mailers as the substrate. So you can see that obviously in person there, but in the probably more easily in the kind of dotted pattern that you see down below in that negative space of what's supposed to be the street. And I really enjoy the idea of working with expressive or non-realistic color in my portraits. I find it an interesting way to, I think it's kind of a metaphor for thinking about taking the idea of skin color out and really divorcing it from that kind of meaning. And again, for me, just musing on the topic of equality among races and other kinds of human differences as well. So that color is very important to me in the portraits. This is another one from Cuba. I call it Squatters Club Cuba, and it was from an interaction of some punk rockers that I met in an outdoor squatters club in Cuba, and they really enjoyed speaking with me. It was actually during the day, even though it was sort of an outdoor nightclub, and we didn't have a language in common, but their way of communicating was through posing for photographs, and then also talking to me about their tattoos and the band names, the bands that they were interested in that were American. So it was a kind of a interesting bonding experience. And this is another friend of mine who, this was actually, I call this Big Baby Board Boss Brent. It's a friend of mine named Brent, who is on the board of the Goldwell Museum, which is a museum an art museum in Nevada, which is the gateway to Death Valley from the Nevada side. And so I was invited to make a painting about the people and the area there. So I did make a painting about my friend and included some flora and fauna native to the area. I had met with the local Tambisha tribe there. They're they are part of the Shoshone larger tribe, the Tambisha people. And they talked to me about the chuckwalla lizards and wild spinach and cabbage, and those were sources of nutrients and for them. And so I wanted to pay homage to them in some way by including those things as well. Again, this is all on this substrate of bubble paper. So you can kind of see that bubbly texture kind of catches the light and shines through this. And I also started turning to painting people that I don't know at all, that I haven't interacted. And the reason that was spurred on was because I recently inherited a photographic album made by my great-grandfather. I inherited it from my mother, who owned a trading post at a crossroads in Wyoming, and he was a photographer and made many photographs of the local Crow tribe there, who he traded with, and their amazing collection of just these beautiful faces. So this one is on various kinds of paper and fabric. And I'm going to be working with an artist, a Crow artist named Kevin Redstar, who lives in that area, on a series and a show, hopefully, that will, each of us are portrait artists, very different interpretations of portraits. And so we plan to do a series of the original photographs, show those, and show the each other, both of our work as well. This is another one from that series. It's called A Girl to Remember. It's quite small. It's 14 inches. And I did these on my residency in North Carolina, this prior one and this one. This is a cook from around the 1960s the place is called Wild Acres Residency. And I found this in the library and thought this was such a wonderful photograph that I wanted to pay homage to the people who had worked there prior. This is a portrait of a girl named Lexi Rubio, who was one of the children that was shot in the Uvalde shootings a year or so ago. And at the time I had been invited to, just after the incident, I had been invited to participate in an American flag show. I wasn't sure, being a portrait artist, how I wanted to go about doing that. But I felt very strongly about the incident that had happened. And so I thought, well, maybe making an American flag out of some of these Amazon mailers, which you can hopefully sort of see peeking through, and having it be a bit of a narrative about her life, using text, I thought would be appropriate. So it is definitely a sad story behind this one. And I've got a couple more here that are kind of the most recent ones. This is also from my travels years ago. This one is from it's called Waiting to Wait, and it is a portrait of two waitresses kind of hanging outside in a Shanghai street. When I passed by, they were very curious and exuded a lot of joy and wanted to interact and say hello. And I really started working at this point with just sort of randomness in the initial painting, lots of drips, and then kind of using the figures as an armature to play with flatness and randomness, but still have a bit of a structure to play with. And this is when I started to get more into adding three-dimensional elements to my pieces. So this is in the show. The most dimensional elements of it are some tile that was sewn onto the surface of the painting. This is called It's Raining Love, and it is also in the show, and it is a portrait of my family. And it represents a bit of a turning point that I'm sort of on now, where I'm starting to work with molded fabric and using, trying to kind of break out of the square or the rectangle in terms of paintings. And so they're becoming a bit more sculptural in terms of just the substrate being dimensional as well. And the last one I'll show you here is another one of a woman that I met in China, who was a very kind woman, and offered me, she was sitting out on the street and had a cushion and offered it to me, and I could tell that was maybe one of her prized possessions. It was in a very poor village. And I thought it was such a kind gesture. And so this again is playing with the dimensional elements and breaking out of the square. So this is the dimensional elements that are actually molded fabric are the pants, the pocket, and the pocket on the shirt. And then this is called Dracaena, by the way. Dracaena is the Latin for dragon, but it is also the name of a plant that you can see there as well. And those leaves on the plants are actually painted on three-dimensional bubble mailers that are then affixed onto the flatter surface. So there's sort of higher relief and lower relief parts of this painting. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about my work, you can definitely check out my website, and I'm at Instagram there at Heidi.Brueckner. And yeah, so thanks so much for listening.
Amy Browning-Dill graduated in 2007 with a degree in studio art and art history from McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland. Since then, Amy has studied under a number of other artists in the Washington, D.C. area, and she's exhibited in the D.C. metro area and across the eastern seaboard, and has worked in collections throughout the United States, England, and Northern Ireland. And then John Petro's work has appeared in juried shows throughout the U.S., from California to Oregon to Texas, and throughout the Maryland, D.C., Northern Virginia area. He's had solo exhibitions at Art Space Herndon in Herndon, Virginia, and the art department gallery at Howard County Community College, and the Bernice Kish Gallery at Slayton House in his hometown of Columbia, Maryland. So I'm going to invite Amy up, and Amy's going to share with us a little bit about her work. Her work's on the second floor, so make sure you have some time to check that out, and she'll have some slides of her work as well. So, welcome to Amy.
Thank you for coming, and thank you to the Delaplane and to Corey for exhibiting my work. I always like coming to the Delaplane for exhibitions myself to see everything here. So I'm very interested in all my work really centers around nature, and I'm interested in telling stories through that. A lot of times you'll see elements of mythology and symbolism from the Middle Ages pop up into my work, and that's kind of where this one's going. I was inspired by poetry at first for this. That's where the word poema comes in. Poema is a ancient Greek word that means workmanship or something that's created. So I chose that rather than poetry because poema refers to the poetry in this exhibit, the work, that paintings that I create, but also the created world, like creation, plants that I'm painting. The series is a memento mori. Memento mori is something that's found throughout art history, and it's a remembrance of death, but mine's more than just remembrance of death. It has a bit of hope. The inspiration for this exhibit started when I found this excerpt from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, who's writing about letters to his wife about the artist Cézanne. And he said, "At no other time than autumn does the earth let itself be inhaled in one smell, the ripe earth, in a smell that is in no way inferior to the smell of the sea, bitter where it borders on taste, and more honey-sweet where you feel it touching the first sounds, containing depth within itself, darkness, sometime of the grave almost." When I read that, I can envision and imagine the smell of the leaves rotting in the fall. And it inspired this first painting that I did of the autumn leaves. So just a disclosure, I actually hate autumn. I really dislike this time of year when everything's like decaying and falling apart and it's getting darker and colder. This part's nice. And then as soon as the leaves fall off the trees, I hate it. It's like, until it snows. But I also do like collecting the little things that fall in autumn, like magnolia seed pod, leaves. I have a bit of lichen, and I have this whole collection in my art room of things that I've from nature, and they appear in a lot of my work. I like to, when I can, paint from actual objects, so you can see all the little textures and details. So I had this idea, but I like spring more. I'm more of a spring person, and summer. I like winter, I like the snow, but I like it when the flowers start to bloom and there's a bit of hope. And I wanted to find poetry that kind of encapsulated that aspect of the seasons. And it took me a while because it seems like a lot of poets really focus on the fall and the winter, but it's hard to find that the spring. So then I kept digging. I actually put this series off. I started this series back in 2019, and it took me a while to really, have the courage to do it and then find the rest of the inspiration. And then last year, this professor of Anglo-Saxon works wrote this book called Winters in the World. It's a journey through the Anglo-Saxon year. And I started reading it, and I realized that it encapsulated some of what I was looking for. I like this one. Frost must freeze, fire melt wood, earth grow, ice form a bridge, water wear a helmet, wondrously lock earth's seeds. One alone, most mighty God, shall imbibe the frost's fetters. Winter must pass, good weather come again. Summer, hot from the sun, the ocean restless. The deep path of the dead will be secret longest. And then, just especially the first part, frost must freeze, fire melt wood. When I'm out in nature, I saw this. I was actually reading this around Thanksgiving last year, and I was out and saw the ice just kind of encapsulating the leaves. And I took this as one of my photographs that I took while out in nature. And then after reading this poetry, I find things in nature that bring back that imagery, and I said, yes, that's this poem. And so this one it's like, I call it fettered in frost, because the frost is just covering all of the leaves. So Anglo-Saxon poetry does three things. It draws connections between the rhythms of the year, the human life from birth through adult, old age, and death, and also the liturgical calendar. So that it's just something different than I was seeing anywhere else. So you'll see when you go upstairs, I exhibited poetry along with my paintings, and you'll see a couple Anglo-Saxon poems. One's from Beowulf, and then you also see some Shakespeare. Shakespeare was another big influence in some of my work. And then I wanted to have something more like symbolic in here. And I've been painting eggs for a while. So it's about 8 years ago, I started doing pisanki. They're the Ukrainian eggs, and it's done with a method of wax and dye. You put some wax on it, and for your design, you dip it in dye, and then you put your next layer of wax. And a lot of times the pisanki have natural things on it, like wheat or flowers. And I wanted to do something with a little bit more depth, like artistically, with more like layers and values and paint colors. But I wanted to use the egg. So I like the eggs have a connection to spring, Easter, and the resurrection. And I did another series using the eggs because they're also fragile. And I just like the fragility of the eggshell. So then I started painting those with acrylic paints. So I used, I blow out the egg just like you would with the pisanki. I use one of those egg blowers and a thing to get the yolk out. And then I paint it with multi-surface acrylics. I have a very limited palette that I use. And then I finish them off with a isolation coat and then varnish. So it's sealed and then varnished so that if it gets dirty, you can clean it and keep the paint looking nice. So here's a couple of the egg shells that I've done. So there's more like that. They're not every single egg has it, but there also might be things that I didn't see when I was painting them that somebody else might see. And I don't like to, I could go through and tell you everything that I've done, but I find that when you find surprises for yourself, it's more interesting than explaining it all the way, because everybody sees something a little bit different too. So I'll be upstairs after the talk for a little bit, if anybody wants to come up, take a look, and has any further questions.
Welcome John Petro.
Good afternoon. So my show is titled Snapshots from a Baltimore Community on the Edge. It's documentary photography. And I too would like to thank the Double Plane for the wonderful space you've given me to display this work. So a little bit about documentary photography. Quick Google search, it's using a camera to chronicle real people and events in a truthful and objective way. Some subgenres that I particularly enjoy with my camera is environmental portraits and street photography. Environmental portraits are portraits, but with people in the environment, whether it be where they're working, where you find them in the street, or where they live, as opposed to being in a studio with a backdrop and things like that. And street photography is also people generally out in the environment, but the difference is street photography is candid. whereas environmental portraits are somewhat posed. As an example, this is a picture of mine, an environmental portrait of, that's Al. He owns a secondhand store, or did anyway, in Denver. That was taken about 10 years ago, and this place has already, I've been there since in that neighborhood, and it's gone. It's succumbed to urban renewal, and his store is no longer there. But I bought that Dave Brubeck album from him, and we chatted, and I took his picture there in his shop. He told me about the Korean War and things like that, but it's a nice portrait of him as far as I'm concerned, and it's in his environment, in the store where he worked, a good part of his life after he got out of the military. Another environmental portrait that's in the show upstairs. This is James. This is in Baltimore, in the community where I focus on in the show. I met James, asked if I could take his picture. He cautioned me about walking around the neighborhood where I was with the camera, expensive looking camera, but we chatted. He took me out into the street here and motioned and lamented the neighborhood he has to live in. And this is a picture I took also about 10 years ago. This is more street photography because although it's street photography, this isn't in the street, this is in the DC Metro one evening about 5 p.m. There's these two gentlemen sitting in the seat opposite me, coming home from work presumably. So, question to ask, is documentary photography art? I came across a couple quotes myself, and I wasn't looking for them. I wasn't looking for these particular quotes. Just that so happened, several weeks ago, I decided to read Middlemarch by George Eliot, and it was a Penguin classic, and they always have a foreword written by some professor talking about the writer, Mary Ann Evans, who changed her name to George Eliot because women were not as popular as authors back then. But anyway, this is a quote that was given that Mary Ann Evans made. A great function of art, including novels, because she was talking about writing, but the great function of art was to widen our sympathies, to amplify experience and extend our contact with our fellow man beyond the bounds of our personal lot. It's a function of art. It's not saying all art has to do this, but one thing art can do is that. And another quote of hers along the exact same lines, if art does not enlarge men's sympathies, then it does nothing morally. And then I also stumbled on this, again, not looking for it, but doing other readings. Dmitri Shostakovich, the famous Russian composer in the Stalin and Khrushchev eras, art destroys silence. So those are functions of art, some things art can do. Trying to come up with a catch-all definition for art is a fool's errand, but I'm happy to be a fool. About 15 years ago, I wrote this in a blog on my photography website as to try and justify why I like to consider the pictures I take are art. So I came up with this. Art is anything that causes one to pause and reflect on the human condition. And I'd be prepared to say that anything in this building meets that definition. So anyway, yeah, documentary photography is art. Some great documentary photography, environmental portraits that we all know. Pretty much everything in this book is that, but Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother from the Dust Bowl days. There's the photograph that was on the cover of National Geographic in the 80s, Steve McCurry, Afghan Girl. As far as I'm concerned, that picture of Afghan Girl is up there with Girl with a Pearl Earring, and the Mona Lisa. My bias toward photography, I'll say that those things rival that. So, the genesis of my particular exhibition that's up on the second floor today. So in April of 2015, a black suspect, if you heard the name Freddie Gray, died while he was in police custody and serious unrest ensued. And that was some spark for me. I don't know why, but watching the news at night and talking with folks about what's going on was some sort of spark that decided, because I often went through Baltimore on my way to the Inner Harbor and the nice restaurants and things. And I always take my camera and I take pictures of various neighborhoods that I passed through. But that prompted me to make a concerted effort to go to some neighborhood in Baltimore and photograph the people that live there. So in May then, I stopped along Wilkins Avenue, which is the main southwest corridor into the city. It's Route 1, essentially. And it is a struggling section. It's suffering with unemployment, with abandoned and vacant houses, drugs, and crime. Anyway, I went in and parked my car and got out and started to walk around. That's where I met James, and it turned out it was reasonably successful. I was admittedly nervous at first, but I met nice people, and I met people that asked me what I was doing there and things like that, but it went well, so I decided to continue. I wasn't sure it was going to develop it, how it was going to evolve, but it evolved. It looked to be going pretty good. So here is a picture I took back in those first week with not people, but typical of Wilkins Avenue. This was right on. Understandably, people ask me, what are you doing when I say I'm going to take a picture? Well, what for? So I had to come up with, this was somewhat in my mind, but to try and articulate it better for people. And then just said I wanted to document folks who lived in or passed through a historic neighborhood in Baltimore in the early decades of the 20th century. And I told them I'd hope to maybe show them someplace, and I'd maybe even make a book of the photographs of the people I encounter. And as an inducement, and I like doing this in general when I take pictures of people, I offered to print out and deliver prints of the pictures I took of them. Or I'd email them if they had an email account, they were just okay digital. So that worked out nicely, and it compelled me to return. Of course, when I go back to deliver photographs I took the week before, I'd take my camera and I'd meet new people and take some more, and then the cycle continued. So, but I say I like to do this. I was just in New York City a couple weeks ago and took some pictures of people out on the street and got their names and email addresses and sent them to them, and heard back from some of them that they were pleased for the photographs. Of course, with cell phones now, everyone's, myself included, taking pictures of our own environmental portraits as we hold up our camera and stand there and stare at the little square box up there. So the photographs were all taken with permission. The children, I looked for an adult nearby that had responsibility and got permission to take the children. So they were all posed, but very quickly. So I'm not ashamed to call them snapshots. So that's why I titled it Snapshot, just to be a little bit clever. There's one that's up there in the show, and to show the quickness the photograph was taken. So there's Mrs. Marshall and her two daughters and grandkids. They were all sitting there just like that. You can see she's working on the daughter's hair. I just walked by and said, "Could I take your pictures?" And I said, "Sure, go ahead." They were skeptical. You can see some of the expressions. Question?
So they were literally sitting like that?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they were just, it was a nice evening.
It looks like it was set up. That
Yeah.
You had them placed.
No. This one it is a picture that's not in a show. It speaks to the neighborhood. It was just taken a little over a year ago. I call it, well, it's a memorial for Lowe, and I don't have the spelling, but I was taking a picture of this, and a gentleman walked by, and he rearranged it a little bit, and we started talking. His name was Sean. He lived a couple doors up. This was a typical 3-story Baltimore house, and the top floor was burned out. The windows, sills were black, and you could see the roof was collapsed and went through the window. Anyway, Sean, who rearranged this thing, he's the one who told me, well, that was his memorial for Lowe. And Lowe was a homeless woman who lived in that on that top floor, and she perished in the fire a couple months prior to this photograph being taken. Back when those incidents happened in 2015, there was lots of talk about how things were going to be improved and all that, and this and just my own experience sadly says there wasn't much change over we're talking 7, 8 years now. There's another just taken exactly a little less than 1 year ago of Wilkins Avenue, and the poor little minion sitting there. But so come back to the beginning. Function of art, hopefully this particular show amplify our experience and extend our contact with our fellow man beyond our personal life. And I've got a self-published book I called Unnoticed No Longer. It's up there, just to look at. But I just believe when we notice something that we haven't noticed before, we're all changed somehow. You may not want to admit it, but whatever it is you've noticed, suddenly it's going to be there and make you a different person. So, thank you.
Thank you, John and Amy. I really like the diversity of the artwork that we have as far as mediums go this round. So again, take some time to check out the artwork and all the exhibitions. Lastly, you're sitting in a retrospective exhibition of Frank DuVal's artwork. I never had the privilege of meeting Frank, but I've had the privilege of meeting some of his family over the last week, and some friends of his, and even spent some time reading the back of some of these postcards. And it's very clear to me that Frank had a lasting influence in people's hearts and was very interested in the social power of artwork, especially in his mailed postcards and things. So it's been a great privilege to work with Carol and Frank, Ted and Mike over the last week. They've been very diligent in creating the exhibition that you're sitting in. So I wanted to invite those three up, and they're going to chat with us just a little bit about the exhibition and some of the artwork in the exhibition. And I'll leave it to y'all to decide who wants to go first, but give it up for these guys.
You are in a Frank DuVal experience right now. Frank, his career went over 50 years, and he began writing postcards 50 years ago, and it is our estimation, and Dave, Mike's estimation, that he attempted to write one postcard a day for 50 years. And if you do the math, that comes up close to 20,000 postcards he sent to people. Mike, I believe he said he had a list of 300 people he would send postcards to. I attempted to count just the postcard aspect of this, and I got up to about 398, and I probably missed some, and that's just the ones Mike and I put up here. And the postcards you see, and this is why we call it You've Got Mail. The exhibition is more than just the postcards, but the postcards, if you were a friend of Frank's, are truly, truly special. And we are just so sorry that we couldn't have a broader selection of who he sent these cards to. There are probably 20 to 30 different addressees in these cards. Each and every card you see on the wall or on the display has gone to the USPS. In certain cases, there's a card that I think came to the Namibian Postal Service. The way the cards are arranged are mostly by who he addressed them to. And there will be a lot of cards to Carol and Carol's family, to Mike and Mike's family, to me and my husband Todd, to my folks. One thing Frank is very known for is kind of camping out at somebody's house or house and trying to get invited back. So the cards to my parents, and there are quite a few cards to my parents, will be thanking them for dinner or thanking them. There's a card where he's thanking in advance for a dinner that he's hoping to be invited to once my parents get back from a vacation. He would tailor these cards to who he was sending to. So to me and to Todd, there's kind of a homage to us over there. Those subject matters are quite different than what he might have sent to his mother or to Carol. And almost every card has a unique message on it. But anyway, Carol dealt with how everything went on the wall. She was an architect, and she laid all this out. She showed up with this massive rental truck filled with the wall art, and the wall art is certainly not randomly put up. And I'll invite Carol over to talk about that and anything else.
Yeah, gosh, I'm Carol, and I'm happy to be one of Frank's neblings. This is the term he chose to describe his nieces and nephews. And so when Frank passed away in 2021, I had the very great honor of clearing out his apartment and his storage units, and so all of the artwork that was in his possession when he passed is, well, some of it's on the walls and the rest of it's taking up my home as in a way that he would appreciate and know. But so when we decided to put this together, we have, again, there are just an abundance of postcards. But there were some primary themes that we all witnessed Frank sort of dive into over the decades. Mike was present for some of them that I was not active in, but in the early, what I know to be in the 60s and 70s, Frank had a great fondness for jazz and loved to go to jazz clubs in New York City and in Cincinnati, where he and Mike worked for a period of time, in Philadelphia and in DC. And so in my experience, that jazz musicians was the first major subject matter of his sort of larger works. And so we started out with the theme of jazz musicians along the wall on the left here. I don't know if it was in the 80s or 90s, but he spent a ton of time at Lily Ponds, which I'm embarrassed to admit I've never been to, but I know it's here in Frederick. I live up outside of Philadelphia. But he started photographing and drawing lots of creatures at Lily Ponds, and he definitely sort of delved into a period of wildlife subject. And during that period, in 1999, he became the artist in residence at Badlands National Park. So you see a large number of bison on that wall, and I think that was the primary location for the bison influence in his life, which he just loved to paint. And then I think it was in 2001 where he was artist in residence again at the Everglades National Park down in Florida. In the 2000s, he as you can see, Frank loved women. I think there's no problem in saying that. He was, well, I won't get into some of the stories, but anyway, he did love women. He was a bachelor for the majority of his life, minus 6 months back in 1966 or something like that. But he realized in the 2000s there was no artist of the Ladies Professional Golf Association. So he decided that he was going to become the artist of the LPGA, and that afforded him the excuse and opportunity to spend time around these, a lot of times beautiful athletic women who had some really lovely curly hair. But they were also, there was also this form to the golf swing, and that form and that movement was repeated in the dancers that he followed. I think that actually went back to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, his love of watching dancers and sketching dancers. And so we certainly found that over probably the entirety of the 50 to 60 years that he drew, he was studying sort of bodies in motion. And so we've dedicated that corner over there to the number of athletes and dancers. Dancers are athletes, of course, but all sorts of forms of bodies in motion. On the back wall, again, there were an abundance of postcards to my grandmother from the early 60s up until her passing in 2002. So this is sort of an eclectic group of drawings that were either sent to my grandmother or done for my grandmother, or of my grandmother's children and grandchildren. So we've sort of highlighted that area. And then we have this, might be the sort of, well, my favorite wall. It's sort of the miscellaneous category, because he would do these pieces for his friends, or because he just sort of delved into a new subject matter. But there are so many inside jokes along this wall, or puns, or plays on history, or plays on art, or a little dabble into. He worked for William Steele for a while, so we've got some miscellaneous Steele images there, and again, he loved women, including Elizabeth Taylor, and so this just covers like a large gamut, but not nearly touching on everything that he delved into. And then there was a period where he really focused on studying the masters and the old masterworks. And when I was I'm an architect, and so when I was in architecture school, he had lots to chat about that. But he studied his work. And as I cleaned up his apartment, I would find the number of books on the old masters, which I hope most of which are now in possession of the Dell Plan and can educate young students on the efforts of the old masters. I mean, there were just notes everywhere. I feel bad. I have so many architecture books at home, and some of them maybe I haven't even opened, but they're really pretty. But he just studied them. He studied his art, and it was good to sort of learn that. And I'm going to pass it over to Mike, who has...
Yeah, he studied and then he practiced. So what we finally figured out was, because so many of us all over the country would get similar postcards, right? But that's how he would work something out until he was happy, particularly the birds and flight and the animals. And then finally, maybe after 10 postcards, he would move to the bigger, what he wanted to do as a finished piece. But nothing was safe from him. Any thought or emotion, he might try to put pen to paper, or what he read in the paper, or his sarcasm in the drawings you'll see everywhere. But he was very close to the jazz world, and they knew him. At Blues Alley up in Manhattan, Frank would always have a front seat, and he'd be sitting there drawing all night. So, and it was he said, no, it's great, I can go into any city. All you gotta do is ask, where's the jazz bar? And he would feel right at home, and often run into a lot of the same people. I'm gonna finish quickly here by just reading. Is Jim Heiberg here? Okay, we created a Facebook page where people would write observations and thoughts about Frank, and it went up to 230 people.
Friends of Frank DuVal.
Friends of Frank
On
DuVal.
Facebook.
But this guy wrote, I don't know him, I'd like to meet him, but he wrote this about Frank. And I thought, that is correct. My experience of him was that of a man who lived in the wonderful world of his mind. At a glance, a misanthrope. Upon examination, a super artistic talent who could document a moment in time with the swipe of a pen. So, enjoy.
If I could just mention one more thing. These postcards that you see on the display here are held together with magnets. So please be very careful if you have keys in your pocket or a watch that might have iron in it. If you get stuck to one, don't panic.
Call
Maybe
me.
call
I have
somebody
the
over. We
tools
have.
of assembly and disassembly.
And Corey
right
has
there.
extra magnets as
Yes.
well. But
Logistics, you say these are postcards, I mean, they're humongous, so we're
Yes.
sending big envelopes, I guess?
No.
Directly into the mail.
Yes.
You'll
These are
see they're
postcards.
postmarked. So that was one of the great things in all of our lives,
Sometimes.
My mailman would knock on the door every time one of these cards would come. And then I'd answer and he'd be standing there reading. Hey, this is really great. So,
We've occasionally had postcards show up like folded in
Yeah.
half, stuffed in our
Yeah.
box, so you know.
That mailman didn't get it.
But anyway, it's a labor of love. It's just so unfortunate Frank isn't here to see this, because he would have loved this.
He would have really loved to talk with these the four artists that have been before us too. He
Oh,
would
yeah.
really enjoy talking to
Oh,
them.
So thank you so much for
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
enjoy.